Welcome to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast. Hi, I'm David Manti with Cannabis Equipment News, and with me today is Andrew Lange, President of Ascendant Management. Thank you very much for joining me today, Andrew.
Thanks for having me.
So before we get started, I'd like to do a little bit of housekeeping. If you guys could help us out by giving us a like, a share, or even subscribe to the podcast, leave us a positive review on Apple Podcast. That would really help us out a lot going forward. All right, jumping into it. Andrew, I read that you designed more than 1.5 million square feet of cannabis facilities. How do you, do you just keep a tally?
Yeah, kind of. I've done about, at last count, 56 projects around, with a lot of them being, a majority of the time, our smallest projects are around 20,000 square feet. Now, as the industry has expanded, really, we're not doing too many facilities under 50,000 square feet. So it adds up pretty quickly.
How did you break into the industry?
It's a good question. Way back when, before legalization in Washington, I had my own company that we were building fully automated aquariums and things like that. And from there, I had met some people that had medical licenses here in Washington, and really they were just looking at setting up this aeroponic hydroponic setup. And I had talked to them and looked over their plans, and I was like, man, you guys are paying a lot of money for some really underperforming equipment, essentially. And got into looking at all the stuff for cannabis and essentially growing indoors, and noticed that it wasn't really too different than a lot of the stuff that we were already doing and the automation that we were already putting forward. And then from there, I did one facility for some people that I know, and they had went from working 7 days a week to working 2 days a week. And from there, I got another referral. Next thing you know, legalization is happening, and I was brought in to do a couple larger facilities. Larger at the time, in the 10 to 15,000 square foot range. And then from there, it's just been pretty much nonstop.
What is a fully automated aquarium?
Oh, just for high-end aquariums that are between $30,000 and $80,000. Things that are more automated, so that the end user doesn't have to spend a bunch of time doing maintenance and things like that. So we were really into the controls and integration of LED lighting and things like that for the aquariums. And so when I was starting to look at the cannabis space, this is way back in 2010. It wasn't really that much different. In fact, a lot of the equipment we had at that time in the marine aquarium space was much better than a lot of the stuff that people were utilizing on small scale growing. And so just kind of made the jump and moved over to that.
I've heard that a lot about equipment in the cannabis industry, where a lot of people are trying to, I feel like we're now starting to enter a wave where people are designing equipment specifically for the industry rather than trying to make some sort of other agricultural application work.
Yeah, that's definitely been the biggest change over the last, I would say, the 5 to 6 years. Is the amount of equipment has just exponentially increased that is designed for what we're doing. Even up to a couple of years ago, a lot of manufacturers were still manufacturing a lot of their stuff in 120 or 240. The reason for that was because that's what you have at a house, not what you have in an industrial facility. And so if you really look at a lot of offerings, you'll still see that. And it's everything that we have in this industry. A lot of it is based on home growing. And it's really just been the last couple of years that people are really starting to focus on delivering pieces of equipment that are designed for, heavy commercial, light industrial type applications, like what we're seeing inside the cannabis space.
So over the course of 56 different projects, what is your approach to using new technology on new cultivation operations?
Well, we try and roll out as much, not necessarily only new technologies, but automation. What we're trying to do is increase efficiency, decrease labor, basically reduce all of our input costs. And so we do roll out a lot of new technology on lots of new projects, and it's actually getting easier now. It used to be quite difficult as people weren't interested in doing anything new. They just wanted to do, the scale up what they were doing. I talk about 6 years ago or more, everyone was just wanting to scale up what they were doing in their garage or in their basement or something like that. And now we get a lot of, as the barrier to entry of cannabis has increased because the investment has to continue to go up. We're not seeing people build, shoestring $400,000 facilities. We're building $20 million facilities. And with that comes more sophisticated investors who are really looking at that bottom line and more open to newer technologies instead of the old school master growers who are, more, a lot of times just more apprehensive to new types of technology and things that aren't really well understood.
So when you got out of the aquarium business, and you said around 2010, is that when you started Ascendant Management?
Yeah, I started Ascendant in 2010.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about the business and everything that you offer.
Yeah, so we kind of offer turnkey solutions as far as design engineering on the consulting side. So what we do is we work with your own engineers, architects, and your general contracting contacts that you would have for your own facility, and we show you guys how to do it right for cannabis. So the biggest problem that we see in the cannabis industry, and one of the biggest challenges to building these facilities is systems integration and full integration of what we're trying to do. Very few companies have experience with mechanical loads for cannabis. It's substantially different than what you get in an office building or a hospital or a pharmaceutical application. There's not very many people who understand the equipment that we actually have to deploy into this. And so systems integration is always very difficult to do. At the end, nothing is talking to each other. And so what we try and do is make sure that we're looking at workflow, and because we understand what you're doing with the facility in operations, how to operate an actual cannabis facility, and then make sure that everything is set up to optimize on that based off of what the client needs, what they're looking for. We do things from full GMP facilities in Europe all the way down to smaller 20, 30,000 square foot rock wool builds and things like that.
How large is Ascendant? How many employees do you have, and where are you guys based?
So we're based out of Olympia, Washington, and we have 8 employees currently.
Okay. You talk about kind of laying out the entire facility from an operational standpoint. How many times do you get in there and, you're teaching the startup rather than them telling you what you want?
All the time.
Yeah.
It's definitely the most common. A lot of times we get brought into projects slightly later than what would be ideal. As people then start to realize after they get their layout and after they start looking at a few things that they just don't know everything that they need. And so a lot of times we're brought in probably a couple months into the build. And with that, we have to go in and revise layouts or really look at what the operator is attempting to do. Because a lot of people have, that's not what they do all the day long. So they don't know exactly how many square feet of cloning they'll need to support, how much flower they're looking to do. A lot of people don't especially take into account a lot of the post-harvest processing space and the really fine detail that is required in that portion of your build. And that's really where we come in to help out. And so we're very often we're going back and showing them how to operate on scale, because the other side of it is, especially when we're right now where we have a lot of companies that are getting going from medical states, they're not used to operating at scale. And operating at scale is substantially different than running a 100 light facility. 1,000 light facility isn't just 10 times more work. It's 30 times more work. It's substantially different. And so helping people scale correctly is one of our main focuses.
What are some of those growing pains that people experience?
A lot of things are not there's several things. Mostly when we're talking equipment wise, it's just using inappropriate equipment sized for the new job. I worked with a company a couple years back that was setting up a 60,000 square foot facility, And their idea was to just put a bunch of Mitsubishi mini splits on their building, and because that's what they were used to doing, and having to describe like, hey, if we go to chiller plants and things like this, we can save massive amounts of energy, extremely high cost savings as well, and have a much better product. So, that's definitely the thing that we see on equipment. We also get a lot of things where, especially in drying or things like that, where people are used to drying, 20 pounds, 50 pounds of cannabis. And it's substantially different than trying to dry 400, 500, 600 pounds at one time. And the last thing is really the labor component. Mm-hmm. Labor is substantially different on scale than it is in a small room. So if you're used to tending a 25 light room, and you say, well, I can do that in 4 hours or whatever it is during the day. So if I'm doing 100 light room, it'll just take me a couple times longer. But that's not necessarily true. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of workflow issues that we have to deal with, and then really looking at the economics behind our cultivation decisions is really a big thing that gets left behind a lot.
Okay. Tell me about your military background and, how that influences your work ethic.
Yeah. So, I think the biggest, I was in the Navy. I did, BUDS which is for SEAL training. I got hurt after that and got out. Okay. So, then I went to school, and then I ended up in the cannabis industry. But, as far as how that really works for us is we were really taught organization really well. When you're working with small teams and things like that, organization and understanding all of your equipment, understanding everything is very, very important, and understanding where you have to be and how to get there. These are the kind of things, this long-term thinking is what I try and bring to the cannabis space and say, all right, yeah, for instance, right now, you guys may not need to cure your cannabis because it sells so quickly. In a lot of these upcoming states, quality doesn't have to be as high as it is in the more mature states, but it's not always going to be like that. So let's look 5 years into the future, let's look ahead, and then let's actually account for all those things right now so that we're not pigeonholing ourselves.
Right. Well, and also you set yourself apart as a market leader right out of the gate. Yeah.
And that's really important. When you see, there's a couple of ways that you can get into the cannabis space. This is what I mostly go over with clients. Is you can be the first mover that is focused on just getting set up as quickly as possible, as cheaply as possible, to take advantage of the higher prices that you get in the beginning of a market. Or you can be the long-term thinker and the long-term mover here, where we take a little bit more time, but we look at operational efficiencies. We look at how we're going to operate for the next 5 to 10 years and build something that works well for that. Mm-hmm. One is really great at getting you up and going. And within a few years, though, more than likely, you're not going to be competitive. And that's where a lot of people are starting to find that out now. As price compression in the market has increased, the margins just go away, and you just can't afford to have a really inefficient facility. You can't afford to have 200 employees when you could have got away with 100 employees. And everyone can get away with it the first year or two of a market. But then after that, it goes away. But the problem is most people haven't made enough money to actually retrofit, because they don't account for the fact that, okay, yeah, if I want to decrease our energy costs, I can switch to LEDs, and then I can switch up our mechanical. Well, now you have downtime in your facility. People don't account for that downtime, and now they're looking at, just getting new lights will only cost $250,000. We can easily do that in 2 years. But then they get around to it. Now you're looking at a month of downtime. You have oversized mechanical. You're just not being as energy efficient as possible, and you're still in a bad position. You're able to get into a slightly better position, but not the best.
When you say oversized mechanical, what do you mean?
So a lot of times, so with LEDs, we have a lower load in general. And so when we're setting up a facility, you get a ROI much quicker if you start with LEDs than you do if you start with HPS or another higher energy output light, because the mechanical is really where all your expense is. LED lighting is cheap. At the end of the day, everyone always wants to talk about lighting being a really expensive part of this build, and it's just not. Mechanical accounts for a majority of our costs. And so with that, what we have to look at is sizing of that equipment. Now, if just to use some really general numbers to make this easy, LEDs use about 40% less energy than an HPS light. That's just because of it doesn't emit infrared. So 40% smaller mechanical systems are obviously cheaper. But if we go ahead and install the mechanical systems that are designed to run an HPS light, and then we step down to an LED light, well, our systems are now approximately 40% oversized. Mm-hmm. So instead of saving money up front where our ROI would have dropped by years, now you're getting a marginal increase in ROI just from the lower operating cost.
You've talked about some things like scaling. What are some of the other, what would you say are the biggest challenges currently facing cannabis cultivators?
Price compression, increased competition are two of the biggest. That, and I think the big thing that's going to be coming up on the horizon that is going to catch a lot of people off guard is quality requirements. Okay. There's most states have very, very low quality requirements as far as sellable flower. But if, for instance, federal legalization or something happens, we're more than likely going to have to adopt universal standards, of which a majority of facilities wouldn't be able to actually hit those standards. Things like not being able to use pesticides and things like that, you would think are easier to roll out, but in reality, they're not. Because if you haven't built your facility around not allowing pesticides into it through incoming air, you'll have the same issue. There's with some of the rules, especially like around California, where your pesticide allocations are very low, your acceptable levels are very low. You can fail from someone spraying an agricultural field miles away. The wind's blowing in the right direction, you get the off spray of that. Now you're failing, and a lot of people just haven't put in the air handling systems that are designed to really handle that type of situation.
Yeah. What are your expectations for when federal legalization will happen, and what's it going to look like when that actually goes through?
That's the big question, isn't it? When is it happen? The Banking Act, if that moves all the way through, that'll be a big step forward. That's really one of the biggest hassles out of the way. I don't think that federal legalization will change the industry too much early on. I personally don't see, I don't really see interstate commerce being a big thing for quite a while, as people will want to protect and insulate the microclimate that they've established in their states, especially because a lot of the big losers in that war, what would be the biggest losers would be a lot of the West Coast, where cost of employment is a much higher, taxes and things like that, where it would just cause the cultivators to ship over to lower energy areas or areas that are more friendly, because that's where your biggest employment is per business. Mm-hmm. You're talking, most companies have 150 plus people in larger facilities, and so a lot of people the politicians aren't going to want to see that go away. So that's where I don't see that interstate commerce is going to be huge, but I do think that we're going to have to adopt some national standards as far as cannabis, because if it becomes federal legally, then they can start instituting their own standards that the states would have to comply with.
What on a state by state basis, do you have a feel for any of the states that might be coming online next?
I think the East Coast is the next. You can see it already, but the East Coast is really the next big thing. We're working on a couple facilities that are going to get started over there. We have clients now who are reaching out and in preparation for legalization in different states. And so I think, I'm not sure exactly which ones, but I think that the East Coast will definitely be the next, followed by the Midwest. And then hopefully we can get everything legal.
True. It'll be, it's a long time coming. So you talk about when new clients come to you. When a new client comes to you or someone at Ascendant, what does that process look like?
So we're really selective about who we work with. We have a very low acceptance rate for clients, because the clients that we want to work with are ones that also want to push the envelope. I'm not really interested in working on projects that are just standard run of the mill or anything like that, because we don't learn anything. We don't further the industry. And so we're pretty selective about who we take. We only do things, most of the time, we're only taking referrals from other clients like that. But essentially what we do is we sit down and we have just a nice discussion about what's your goals? What are you attempting to do? Where are you attempting to do it? Do we have budgets to work with? And then start really diving into some of the particulars that have to do with that, with their goals. So making sure that the client understands a lot of the timelines is one of the biggest things. That's one of our longest initial conversations. I don't think I've ever had anyone who didn't assume that they could start a project and be done with it in 6 to 8 months. So resetting expectations is one of the definitely the most fun thing that we get to do in the beginning of the project, is tell everyone that, hey, this takes a lot longer and it costs a lot more than you're assuming right now. But it's still possible. So,
you talk about being really selective. Tell me a little bit about your experience with Onyx Ergonomics Ergonomics in Washington State. Agronomics. See, look at this is the problem with writing things out.
No worries. I think if they had $1 for everyone who pronounced the name wrong, they'd be able to expand a lot more. So with that company, I started working with their owners in 2015 and started designing out a facility for them. They had taken over a really old warehouse, really, Rainier Laboratories in Shelton. And so it was a pretty rough building. Since it's right next to us, they also utilized our general contracting services to do the full build. And so the goal there was essentially to come up with an extremely efficient facility that is aeroponically operated and all LED lit. The operational goals were to be 60% more energy efficient, and we were able to achieve that than their nearest competitors. And the focus is on being able to provide the most consistent, cleanest, and greenest cannabis in the state of Washington.
Do you have any stats in terms of their output?
Yeah, they put out between 10,000 and 12,000 pounds a year right now. They have some expansion going on that'll take them a little bit higher than that.
Okay. Are you a part of the expansion?
Yes, we did the design work for that expansion.
Okay. After you work with the clients, what's the relationship like afterwards? Is there a constant conversation, or is it kind of, all right, you're off on your own now?
Yeah, so we've had both. Some clients, we don't take on very many for operational consulting and management. So, but we do. A lot of times what we're doing is we're getting in and we're working with that client for probably the first 6 months to a year. And then we start really pulling back as they get their legs under them and start to understand how to operate things, how to do things. And so it's really dependent upon the client. We have done facilities years ago that we're still actively consulting in and still working with those clients. And we offer monthly consulting for growing, processing, management, things like that. And then we also have clients who, the day that they got the facility, they said, all right, we're good. So you're going to take off. And we like working with both. So,
okay. Talking about speccing equipment into new facilities, have you been running into any supply chain issues lately, given the pandemic?
Oh, yes. Everything is taking way longer, costing a lot more, and if it's available at all.
Yeah. That's
big issue with a lot of our builds right now.
I mean, has that sunk any builds because costs just go through the roof and they don't have the wallet for it anymore?
Not on any of our projects, but I have heard of projects definitely hitting walls or not being able to hit timelines. That's the biggest thing that we're seeing on our side, is really just timelines are getting shot due to nobody's fault, just not being able to get equipment. It can even be very minor things. And these are the things that, we're really cognizant of, especially after last year, where we had projects just completely grind to a halt. just because you couldn't get basic materials. And now it's really a lot of basic materials are even scarce that can stop a grow. It doesn't have to be a chiller plant or a transformer. It could be something as small as getting the right type of piping. That's, went from a 2 to 3 week lead time to an 8 to 12 week lead time, which pushes everything in the project back. So right now, I definitely tell people to order things quicker. Well, especially when we're looking at anything that has to do with metal right now, metal buildings and things like that. We're really trying to push through the design side on that pretty quickly because the price is going up by percents a day. So we're really pushing hard on getting those type of things designed out as quickly as possible, where normally we're telling people to slow down a little bit. Let's take a little bit of extra time. Let's not buy things right off the bat, because that's generally one of the biggest issues we run into is not thinking everything through and buying things reactionarily. But now we're just back over to doing the opposite because there's no other choice. It's either get it in quick, but we make sure that everything's designed properly. We just have to speed up the process a little bit, working, more overtime.
Yeah, I get that. It seems like a lot of people are working overtime right now.
Yeah, it is crazy how much has been going. And, the biggest thing is that I see is projects have been delayed. 2020 delayed a lot of construction projects. And then when the pandemic started to wind down and people started to see the light at the end of the tunnel, everyone went back to building and just everyone hit at the same time. And now everything's just backed up because, the demand is sky high. Majority of things really slowed down for the first 6 months after, we went into lockdown and things like that last year. But after that 6 months started to expire, then people started really getting back into the construction. But now 2 years worth of projects were all hitting at the same time. So
it's just a lot going on, man. Can you talk to me about your retrofit projects? What are some of the bigger challenges? I was recently talking to somebody about some of the unforeseen challenges with retrofits. Some of the things, particularly like contaminants that are still in the building and just some of the unknowns. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the challenges you've encountered with retrofits and, where do you stand between, do you prefer a retrofit or is it easier just as a new build?
Yeah, contaminants are actually a huge one. It's one of the things that we go in on a lot, but it sounds like someone else has already covered that. So one of the big things that I see in retrofits is structural. It's the most expensive thing that we have to change. And that can become a really big issue really, really quickly. And so that's one of the first things we look at. So when you're looking at a building and you have this warehouse and this happens all the time, like, hey, my investors, they have a 25, 30,000, 40,000 square foot warehouse, whatever it is. We want to build in there. And then we go and look at it and we say, well, here's the problem. It wasn't designed, the roof, for instance, so the structure wasn't designed for load. So now we can't hang any of our mechanical. We can't set any of the mechanical off of the existing structure. And we have to build a building inside a building, which becomes extremely expensive. And people really get a little bit short-sighted on that because they own the building, right? They think they have something that really needs to be utilized because they own a $500,000 or $1 million building, not realizing that the short-sightedness in that is going to lead to costs that probably are the same as the building. We've done multiple facilities that the structural upgrades have been 10, 15, 20% of what the total build was unforeseen. And so that's one of the big things that I tell people to look at initially. Another big one that is in the planning phase is going to be the infrastructure. Making sure that we have the available infrastructure for your scaling out. The amount of power that you might have at a warehouse is guaranteeingly not nearly enough for cannabis. And it's really important to make sure that you understand that those costs can trickle into the millions very, very quickly, unless you verify that all that is available before you start. And I've had several projects that we got hired on really late into their design process, and they had already bought the land, already, had started working on the site plan. And then we tell them, like, look, we need this much more power, this much more water. We need fire flow. If you don't have sprinklers in your building, that can add $1 million+ easily. If you're on a well and you have sprinklers, you need to have storage tanks. those can be hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, depending on the size. And it's just little things like that that get overlooked. And then, their $10 million budget is all of a sudden 15 million because of, a power upgrade that, we have plenty of power, I think, but then you have to upgrade the substation a mile away or something like that. And the municipality hits you for that.
Right. It's I feel like with the retrofits, people see a warehouse and they think it's an industrial space, but it's a warehouse, not a manufacturing facility.
Exactly. And that's where oftentimes, having done as many projects as we have, I would say oftentimes, and I'd have to look back to be sure, but I'm confident to say that new builds are the same cost or less than retrofits in general. The envelope is, people forget how cheap. And I say that, but when we're talking about buildings that can cost $1 million, it doesn't sound cheap. But when you look at it per square foot, a metal building and slab and things like that are the lowest cost thing that you're about to buy. Mm-hmm. And so making sure that you have everything is everything that you need from the start is really, really important. And some people overlook that. It was a lot different a few years back when real estate, like for instance, in Washington, the real estate requirement for cannabis was very small. It was like 1% of all commercial real estate would qualify for cannabis use. And then out of that 1%, because Washington was one of the first states, very few landlords were really interested in renting. And so a lot of people had to do retrofits because there was just no space that was available for greenfield projects.
Mm-hmm. With the Onyx project, I had read that you specified the Essence Grows aeroponics and the Atrium system. Could you talk about why you chose to go with that?
Yeah. Well, like I said earlier on, we had gotten into aeroponics and hydroponics, and that was kind of our specialty as far as design. But we used to build all of our own equipment, which I'm sure you can imagine comes with its own hassles, especially because I'm not really interested in being an equipment supplier. So as soon as something viable came in, because most of the aeroponics stuff was more for greenhouses, it's very rare anyway. But most of the aero and hydro stuff that was available on the market wasn't really great for cannabis. Mm-hmm. Utilizing centralized reservoirs and things like that is really nice, except for it just doesn't work great for cannabis because of all the different nutrient requirements of each strain or cultivar. So with that, Essence came into the picture. I had visited a grow in Seattle that was running their equipment. And I started a conversation with them, and I was very impressed with their vision for what they wanted to do in the future and how they wanted to develop equipment. And so we kind of team up there and utilize some of my experience in the cultivation side and actually doing these facilities with their expertise in sensors and controls and what they were already doing to develop not to develop, but to roll out a really, really effective product.
In terms of a really effective product, what are some of the most successful grows that you've seen throughout your career?
Really, Onyx is one of the top. I have to, they're pushing out massive numbers, huge efficiency. They're averaging something like 2.7 grams per watt, which is huge. Labor statistics there are extremely low. They're doing that 10 to 12,000 pounds with less than 30 employees.
Ooh.
So that's very impressive. Energy wise, we designed that place to be as energy efficient as possible. Mm-hmm. Even utilizing wastewater to cool the facility. I mean, that facility only has 1.5 megawatts for that entire production, which is 50% or more less than other people.
Okay. When you say 2.7 grams per watt, what would you say you see more on average?
The average that I see a lot is about 1.8.
Okay.
Under LEDs.
Okay. I was interested to read a little bit, and I was hoping you could tell me a little bit more about your Greenfield project in Portugal.
Yeah. So with that, I'm a partner on a full GMP, GACP, pharmaceutical grade cannabis cultivation facility. It's going to be approximately 50,000 square foot, 700 lights of production, and it's going to be, it's everything that we rolled out at Onyx, cranked up to 11. So we're very excited to get that going. And it's really a combination or accumulation of all the technology, all the different things that we've done across the world, all putting it into one place to provide a superior product to the European market, with the goal to be unirradiated products. Currently, nobody's providing unirradiated product inside the EU marketplace. And that just means we have one big advantage on everyone else. With the bacterial counts and things that we're able to achieve with aeroponics, because we don't have media, we don't have bugs, we don't have to worry about pesticides, we don't have to worry about anything, because we can grow in a sterile environment. And that's where aeroponics really leads. And so that's what we're going to be rolling out over there in an attempt to be the first to have unirradiated product.
With projects sort of scattered all over the globe, I mean, how do you stay sane and keep it all organized, man?
I live off of my calendar app, essentially. And a lot of reminders. Luckily, I have a really, I'm pretty lucky that I have a really understanding fiance that helps me out whenever possible, and doesn't mind me having to travel for weeks at a time sometimes. But yeah, it's over the years, things have gotten so busy. And, when I started, I got out of cannabis in 2012. I just said, I'm done with cannabis. This is the most frustrating industry ever. Having bank accounts shut down constantly. You take a check from a cannabis company and now all of a sudden you're out of a bank account. People always doing things like that. And essentially dealing with the early part of the industry was really difficult. And then, I got back into it about 8 months later, and it just grew so quickly that it hasn't stopped since.
What motivated you to get back in?
I had an acquaintance that I knew pretty well who was starting a grow, and they really wanted me to work on it. And so I agreed to it. And then that was really around the time that project ended in 2014. That was really around the time where the industry started to shift, where we were getting more sophisticated investors. Because remember, early on, I was mostly having to work with investors and growers who just weren't very sophisticated. And so it was more difficult to manage, telling people like, all right, we have to build a chiller plant. We have to do this. We have to do this. And them having no understanding, but wanting to have a massive say into how it would work. And so that was one of the things that was just really difficult, that part in time.
Is that sort of why you've stayed on the path with using referrals and kind of staying smaller?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I have a lot of other things going on. I own a dozen other companies. So mostly taking on things that are stimulating are things that, are high on the list. Is mostly working on projects that are we're going to learn something. We're going to try something new. We're going to deploy a technology that a group that really wants to work at it is what we're looking for. Instead of just taking every client who comes off the street looking for something, it's mostly working with clients who are very interested in pushing the envelope themselves and trying something new. And because I think that's really what's going to be required for the cannabis industry to hit the next level.
I mean, a dozen other companies. What other markets are you in?
Things from real estate, construction, and then I have a climbing gym up in Everett. Some stuff like that. Okay,
you like to climb?
I love to. Yeah, that's actually why I came out to Washington originally.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. Do you have a personal connection that brings you to the cannabis industry?
I really didn't, besides some of my climbing partners that had grows. I actually had never, I had only, even consumed cannabis a couple times before getting into the space. Mostly it wasn't really at first, it really wasn't a love for cannabis. It was a love for solving design issues and solving problems that got me into the space, because this is an amazing industry where the book is not written yet. We write it every single day as to how to do things. And when I started, it was just this big wide open thing where nobody had any rules. Nobody had any idea of what to do on scale. And it was very interesting to try and figure all that out.
Do you think it's going to be as fun in the industry after it's not the Wild West anymore?
Yes and no. It's a different type of fun. It's already basically 100% different than it was 8 years ago. The people are different. The scale is different. The consequences are different, frankly. I mean, you used to be able to turn out any product you wanted and sell it right away. And that's no longer the case. So it attracts a different type of person, which, is good and bad at the same time. I see a lot of legacy people doing really well, and I see some new people coming into the market who have no experience and they're doing well. And I've seen both do also really bad, but it does take a special type of person to excel in this market, because it's extremely dynamic. I've worked with pharmaceutical companies and people from the pharma industry, and you would think that those are the type of people who do really well in this to create a really good product, but it's actually, that's not really true, because the pharmaceutical industry is so stiff. It doesn't change. You have one thing and that's what they do forever. Whereas cannabis, the rules change to it every day. You can wake up and then all of a sudden, I remember, 5-6 years ago, you wake up in the morning and the $100,000 in packaging you just bought is now illegal. And so you have to pivot and figure out how to do everything in a couple of days to get your orders out. And so it does attract a certain type of person. I see that as the industries mature, that kind of starts to drop off a little bit. But it's going to be like this for years. That's one of the reasons why I'm really excited to go to Europe, is because it's still the Wild West out there, but it's more institutionalized because the cost of entry is much higher. So, what's one of the things that we're already seeing is our approach to solving problems is already shaking things up. It's quite a bit different than the standard.
If you could give one piece of advice to people that are starting up or interested in getting into the cannabis industry, cannabis cultivation specifically, what would that be?
Take your time and plan. Don't rush into things. The gold rush mentality is only good for the person selling the shovel. So, and a lot of manufacturers will lure you into that thinking that, hey, we have the one thing that is going to make you do great and all this and that. And if you don't have a really firm understanding about how your entire business is going to work, you can get yourself into some serious trouble pretty quickly. So I just tell people, don't rush. The cannabis industry isn't going anywhere. If you're a couple months behind your competitors, if you've thought things out better and you can operate more efficiently, you'll win at the end.
Well, Andrew, thank you very much for taking the time today, man. It was really was a pleasure.
Thanks a lot for having me.
Yeah. For Andrew, I'm David Manti, and this has been the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast. We'll see you next week. Thank you for listening to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.